Hello guys! Welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we paint the Games Workshop heavy metal style in my own way. New year, a new series, in which I replicate Games Workshop box arts using my techniques and methods, and of course a bit of my personal taste, to show you how much technical and artistic freedom you have while painting, even when you are aiming to a very specific look and visual style, or maybe trying to match a precise description from a client. I'm going to use GW models because everyone knows the heavy metal tropes and how codified and tight their process is, or at least publicly presented. And since this kind of angle can be really useful to ease the work of wargamers and commission painters, I'll put the accent on efficiency and the economy of the steps, without really going into the quote-unquote extreme of speed painting, but still keeping things smart and quick. Because, less time spent on a model means more models ready for battle. And as a plus, stay until the end for some juicy true metallic metal top secret tricks. When you'll get your copy of Eternus, switch the order of these two steps, because the tight relation between the spiky, pointy parts makes building this whole area a real pain. I'm going to start from the base with a simple and quick lava setting, which always fits well with chaos. There are limits in which I can work with the GW look, and the generic grassy field is the line I will never cross. I use a paste made for mud and wet ground to build up the soft, fluid volumes of the lava. And I prime everything in black. With the airbrush and undiluted white ink, I establish the values of the glow, keeping a high intensity in the outer rim to frame the model on the base with kind of a spotlight, and to give the subtle, realistic sensation of the heat, slightly decreasing around the central, more solid mass. And I reinforce white and values, adding also a bit of texture, using thick, heavy body white. I fix the tones starting with a foundational yellow, that with its saturation and staining power compensates for the translucency and weak impact of orange, and the tendency of red to become pink when optically mixed with white. I use inks because their natural glossy finish will bounce a ton of real light that, coming back from the black matte cracks, will make the virtual glow automatically more intense and fluid, thanks to the unpredictable moving reflections. I cover everything with a generous coat of PVA glue, a super effective trick that gives a better surface for the crackling paste to grab and stick to in the long term. That will also produce more cracks with the moving and stretching of this extra gummy layer. Don't worry, when dry the glue is completely transparent and nicely glossy. Then a thick coat of Mordant Earth. That I immediately put under the most intense heat my blow dryer can produce, to really boost the effect. Now that I have the pattern of the cracks and their flow in place, I can render more precisely the extreme points of the glow that I apply where lines converge, showing more of the molten rocks underneath. Since I plan to work with a few heavy, quick and dirty sprayed layers, I put the scenic base aside, and this way I can also better reach a few complicated lower angles. The idea behind this project is to use the box art as a general final goal, or better, a visual frame for the development of the process. And as often happens in commissioned work, unleash personal creativity inside those borders. I was immediately on board with the old school full metal silver armor. That, quite strange for a Chaos character, is really light and bright. Then, studying the lore, like a good box art painter should do, I found out that Eternus is like an ironically twisted evil parody of a Stormcast, that even with its look mocks the knightly glory of Sigmar's champions. For this reason, I decided to double down on the concept and go really heavy with the idea of a shiny knight, taking automatic inspiration from John Borman's Excalibur and its super reflective and almost otherworldly armors. Yeah, all this just to say that I used the mirror finish chrome paint. Molotov Liquid Chrome is my favorite product to achieve this kind of hyper-realistic finish that I use only in extreme cases, because it's so realistic that it doesn't always work well in our small scale. Actually, almost never. Making clearly visible how light really bounces on these small shapes, killing any remaining suspension of disbelief. But don't worry, I'll do a ton of stuff over this base, taking care of the issue. But first, I need to bring back the few non-metallic parts, because I'm literally blinded by all this light bouncing back from my powerful daylight bulbs. I establish a subtle, but in person, really powerful contrast of finish, using the super matte look of acrylic gouache, and to keep these parts more grounded, and in contrast with all the tones that the armor will express. I use just 3 basic tones and their mixes to base the, let's call it horse: heraldry, bones, teeth and skulls. With the stereotyped local colors in place, I can start modeling the virtual volumes and shapes, establishing the structure of the fake shadows. Burnt Umber is always an amazing starting point for this kind of initial roughing of the shapes, because it optically and, if you mix it, also physically contains all the primary tones, and as consequence, the huge spectrum of colors they can create. And this means that you can always build up harmonious shades of every possible hue coming out from its basic tone. Plus, it's great for subtle weathering. The glossiness of pure inks applied over this mirror finish keeps everything super shiny without any loss on the effect. Then I use a bit of yellow and red from below to better integrate the model with the lava base. But I'm really gentle with this light, because I don't want to turn it into an explicit OSL effect. It's more like a subtle, realistic feel of a pool of lava under their feet. Basically, I want it to be visible only if you tilt the model upside down. And again, there's no glow in the box art. Because of the natural high value of all my local tones, and the huge amount of light I'm getting from the chrome finish, the plan is to work exclusively with the shadows to create the volumetry of the figure. But even if I don't need highlights, I still need tones and cool visual effects, because otherwise the figure will only bounce back the colors of my studio, and mostly black, as the tiny toy soldier that it actually is. So, inspired by the Excalibur armors, I add also turquoise into the mix to keep defining volumes, increase the number and variety of the fake reflections, and add general complexity. This time I cut the ink with a good amount of thinner, because this color is more powerful and staining than the others, and here I need a gentle effect. I spray staying almost perpendicular to the model, with just a bit of angle from above, because in the top parts I mostly want to maintain the wicked light silver. Now I can safely bring back the base. And working with a completely opposite, from dark to light approach, I close the airbrush phase, defining a similar rough rendering of the volumes on the non-armor materials. This will further improve the contrast of matte versus shiny finish. And because of the intrinsic outputs of the two methods, the matte parts will look generally darker, and the metallic ones lighter, even if at the moment their actual values are pretty close. To define the precise gold trims and the bronze inserts, I switch to the wet palette, but this doesn't mean that I have to change tools. I keep using inks for their amazing glossy-on-glossy effect that maintains the hyper-polished look. And to tame their staining power and low-tension flow, I dilute them with water and a good amount of heavy-body acrylic retarder. The water adds transparency, reducing the concentration of the pigments. And the dense retarder prevents the ink from staining the base when I slow down or stop the brushstrokes, adding also a tone of body easy to spread and control with precision. Way better than running water moving by itself. Little interesting bit. I want the armor to be reflective, but not really new or clean. So on the large open areas, I use a stippling motion to start building up a sense of texture, stains, and little damages, still on a reflective material. I know, it is very yellowish and saturated at the moment, but I'm already considering the desaturating effect of the highlights, so I'm overcompensating. Don't think for a second that all this talking about Excalibur and shiny armors made me forget how greasy and weathered Eternus looks in the original box art. And if we have to paint oil and dirt, why not use what is essentially real grease and dirt, aka oil paints? Again, I don't need light. So my palette is a simple set of dark tones, with a strong push to cold sensations, coming mostly from the bluish Payne's Grey, that, if you never used it, is basically a darker Space Wolf's Grey. I need panel lines, dark trims, and accumulated grime, and oils give me all that in a single pass. Made even easier by the general glossiness underneath, that lowers the surface tension of the system even more, making the paint automatically flow and accumulate only inside the sculpted recesses. The raised areas remain almost untouched, and all the intricate shapes come out with a super sharp definition. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page. That keeps the lights on, and where I publish the real-time footage of my videos, articles, and extra cool stuff. Thanks a million, guys! As a bonus, the adjustment and cleaning stage is super quick and easy. Almost not needed. Just a quick fix of a few spills and excesses, with a tiny bit of white spirit. In a second separated stage, I apply the bluish verdigris effect around the trims of the armor of the mount. Verdigris should be more greenish, but I agree with the box art. And a blue note completes better the scheme, with the opposition with the yellow bronze. And this is fantasy, so we can do whatever we want. Still, I cannot resist. And I add on top of that another level of a slightly turquoise note. It adds depth and extra movement with the second layer, and it satisfies my OCD for colors. There is still a lot to do, but at this stage you can see the plan unwrapping and starting to shorten the distance to the objective. I keep balancing the visual flow with the back and forth between metallic and matte rendering. My palette is again contained in a limited pool of basic matte tones, kind of a blue, red, yellow system, that I can mix to easily get grounded, slightly desaturated colors. And my objective here is extremely simple. Paint a ton of light definition through textures. Fur on the mount with short brushstrokes. Roughness and grit on the skulls by stippling. Visible fibers and cuts on the banners with long, sharper strokes and different opacities. Oh, and only at this stage I noticed that I've completely forgotten that the base is not finished. I add pools of yellow, orange and red, and I complete the effect by adding extra reflections and bouncing light. Metals are the main protagonists, so I keep their final rendering as the last bit, so I can boost their impact to be more than anything else already painted. Like for the matte parts, the point here is to add definition through the use of textures, the sense of materials, and a more precise control of extreme lights. I use inks to mix my own custom shades of bronze and gold. And to keep the reflective finish, I add them to a light, almost heavy body silver, easier to control in these micro applications, that can also add the grittiness of its own mass to these micro scratches, dents and battle damage. This is another product with a very realistic finish, especially on large scales, but that most of the time doesn't really work in miniature scale. So, extremely situational. And here is one of the best kept, quote-unquote, secrets of the miniature painting world. Silver typographic ink for highlighting the edges of a true metallic finish. There is nothing in the world more metallically shiny than this. It should be alcohol-based, but it doesn't mix with anything. And it doesn't work with anything else than a thin, pointy brush. You really don't want this stuff in your airbrush. But when that pointy brush touches a sharp edge, the edge becomes real solid metal. Don't worry, you can thank me later. And here is the final result. A fun, relatively quick job of about 4-5 hours that became kind of a primer on true metallic metal. But since it's becoming so rare and underestimated both in wargaming and miniature painting in general, I'm fine with that. Because I really want to push it as a crazily fun, deep, and yet to be fully explored way to render cool effects. Going back to the original theme of the video, after periods of raging, untamed creativity, check the previous video if you don't know what I'm talking about. Going back to my roots in nitty-gritty commission painting feels like crawling under a warm blanket. And I hope you like this alternation between advanced and abstract concepts and more functional, practical painting. Because depending on mood and inspiration, I really love to do both. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!